That's one of the tough things about comedy in general, always, I guess, is that there's no straight path. It's not like, yeah, I'm a junior analyst, and in 3 years I'll be a senior analyst.
Right.
Like, that's not really how any of that goes.
Dave Bolger here, and welcome to Had I Known, a show that explores the journeys of some of the most interesting members of the Hamilton College community. This week's guest is Gabe Mollica, class of 2014. All right, back at it again. So I spent a day this weekend at the Brimfield Antique Flea Market in Brimfield, Massachusetts. If you haven't been, you absolutely must check this thing out. I mean, it is miles of flea markets. And even if that's not your thing, and before I started going, it wasn't my thing, you learn a lot. You learn that anything you can imagine, people collect. You learn, as I did, that toys you had as a child are now antiques and expensive. And I learned that my 9-year-old daughter is a far better negotiator than I am now in my mid-40s, which I think bodes well for her, a little depressing for me. So next time I buy a car, bring in the 9-year-old. All right, Gabe Mollica this week. A while back, I talked to Selena Kopic and enjoyed hearing from her about working as a stand-up comic in New York. So I was looking forward to digging deeper into that world with Gabe. But I first became aware of Gabe when he took part in an alumni panel talking about another topic that I find even more interesting, and that's having a podcast. Gabe is the creator and host of 35 Minutes with Gabe Mollica, where every week he talks to a different classmate. And hearing Gabe talk about his podcast experience, it's very similar to my experience. So I wanted to talk to him about it, compare notes, and, make sure I didn't have a competitor on my hands here. It was fun to get to know Gabe, hear a bit about his story of getting into comedy and starting a podcast. I always find it fascinating to hear about the world of stand-up. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Here's Gabe Mollica, class of 2014. Hello, sir.
Hello, Dave. How's it going?
Good. How you doing?
Not bad at all. It's nice to talk with you today. Thank you for having me on your podcast.
Thank you for doing it and for agreeing to do it so quickly and on short notice.
My pleasure. Yeah, I book a podcast too, and that's a lot of times the hard part. The stuff we do by ourselves, we set our own schedule, but when you have to coordinate with other people, it gets tricky. So it was my pleasure. I could fit you in.
You're a good man. And and when you're not getting paid $80 million to do it and have a day job, it makes it even harder.
Yes. Not being Joe Rogan does have its disadvantages.
Some advantages though too, let's be honest.
Yes, no, I prefer to be Gabe. But
well, it's nice to see someone with the gear set up like you do. Usually I'm like, can you turn the TV off behind you, please? Or
yes, I have learned it's all trial and error, as I'm sure, because this is a relatively new podcast endeavor as well, correct?
About a year old, yeah.
Oh wow, okay, mine's even younger. So I'm probably turned to you for advice, but yeah, you make your mistakes, and you, in terms of equipment, in terms of background noise, in terms of editing, but it's a fun thing to learn, and I think it's a very useful thing. I don't think podcasts are going anywhere.
No.
And so it's sort of fun to know the technical side too.
Yeah.
The thing that I sort of take for granted because I listen to a million podcasts. So
nice. And the more you listen to them, you realize, well, they made that sound good. How'd they do that?
Yeah. I'm very impressed now. I listen to ESPN Daily every day, and it's like a part scripted, part conversation, half hour. And it's just so well put together with audio from interviews, sports games, the person they're talking to. It's just music. It's just like really, and they do it every day. And so I'm very, very particularly impressed by that one.
Yeah. Yeah. You talk about making mistakes. The first episode I ever put together, I was using, I thought I was going to be all fancy and I wanted it to sound as great as possible. And I was like, Zoom stinks. So I'd found some other program that recorded natively on both ends, stitched it together and sent it. I'm like, oh, I'm going to use that. It's going to sound so much better. And the thing never worked. It would constantly cut out. And the first episode I had gone through like an hour-long conversation and it kept cutting out at the end to the point where we finally just said screw it because it got late at night. And I never actually had a chance to say official goodbye or thank you. So when I cut the episode together, there's no end of me saying thank you. And I found a way to trail off one of the last comments with music and so forth. And I apologized on the show, like, oh, it was a technical mistake. I didn't get it. And then I was kind of like, I kind of like the way that sounded. So now I do it in every episode.
Nice. Very nice. Yeah, you that's how a lot of traditions start, right? A little bit of and that I think I've seen that program. I think the algorithm of ads wants me to buy it too, and I just haven't had a problem with Zoom yet.
Same. And the other funny thing is my biggest regret is not doing it sooner. Like I always thought this was sort of the kind of career I wanted to get into. I did a lot of stuff at WHCL and thought I actually had a job my senior year at WOUR in Utica and thought, okay, I'm a professional, I'm on my way. And then went on in a different career path. And I remember not long after I graduated being out at some alumni event and seeing a friend of mine who said, are you still doing the radio thing? I said, no, I'm not. And he said, oh, you should start a podcast. And this was in like 2006 or something like that. And I was like, what the hell is a podcast? What are you talking about? Yeah. And I constantly think about like, I should have listened to the guy,
Yeah. Oh yeah. You would have had probably more work in the front end, but any podcast that's existed since then has gotten pretty big just due to consistency.
Right. And how do you find doing it? I know yours isn't like, hey, I'm a comedian doing a funny podcast. You have a very specific niche, which I think is a smart thing in podcasting, but how have you found finding an audience, and do you find it helping your comedy career at all?
That's a sort of interesting question. It's something I think about a lot because I'm talking to my former classmates and teachers and some comedians that I consider comedy classmates, but for the most part it's people I went to high school with. And so part of me wants to there's a part of me that says, let's do that as big as I can do it, right? Let's just talk to everyone I graduated high school with. So we'll branch out organically that way. That's like one part of my brain. And the other part of my brain is, then you can only get as big as the people you went to high school with. And so I'm like, like that's limiting in some way. But for now, I'm getting a lot of feedback when I talk to people who I went to high school with. People seem to be really enjoying it. It seems to be novel in some way. That every comedian I know, all my friends, have podcasts. And they're all pretty similar. And this one seems a little bit different. And I have a pretty loyal fan base that, depending on the episode, a lot of people listen to, or more than I expected, I guess. And for somebody that like me, who's not particularly like famous yet, in a certain sense, I don't know.
We're going to fix that. We're fixing that with this.
Well, I don't know if I want to be famous. I want to be able to have opportunities to do more comedy. That's sort of like my goal. And it's nice. I have a family member who, my cousin Devin, writes for The Daily Show. And so if I told him your name, Devin, if I told you his name, Devin Delquanti, at no point would you be like, oh, of course, Devin Delquanti. But like, he got nominated for an Emmy 2 days ago. Like, he's an accomplished writer, comedian, and he writes for The Daily Show and he's been doing that for a long time. And it's one, nice to have somebody in the family who has done it. And two, that's sort of like a model for me in a lot of ways where it's like, you can make a career out of it. You can have a family. You don't have to do open mics forever. You can be creative. And, those opportunities, it's in comedy, it's called a credit. If you have a credit, if you write for even one season of Saturday Night Live or The Daily Show or James Corden or wherever, that does open up a ton of doors for you. Oh, now I can headline on the road. Now I can tell a club, hey, pay me for a weekend to do stand-up. And so it's sort of cumulative in that way. But at no point, again, I was sort of kidding before, like, I really don't want to be Joe Rogan. 50 million people listening to everything I say. I don't know if that's like a healthy way to live your life.
Right.
But I do have funny things to say and stories to tell. And shows that I write stand-up shows, which are sort of like a one-man show, but all jokes. So I have things to say. And I'd like to get big enough where I can do those things without compromise. That's sort of like my artistic goal.
Got it. It was one of the things, your point about the chasing credits is one of the questions I had about working in comedy. I grew up watching stand-up comedy and have long been a fan. I lived in New York for years, and my friends and I spent way more time at the Comedy Cellar than I think we ever imagined we would, because we loved it so much. And it seems like for the longest time, comedians were chasing the TV deal, right? You get to pilot season and then land a pilot, and then there was also a track that seemed like, we'll just get on SNL, right? Now with the way the media world is, I'm curious, is it just the same sort of goal, or does it change, or is it find the $80 million podcast deal?
That's a great question. I think some people right now would tell you, oh, just like try to go viral on TikTok. It's probably the smartest thing. Like, truly, if I were a smart man, I would just be making videos in my room all day on TikTok trying to go viral. I don't get a lot of joy from that. I get joy from people. And
you like the audience response.
Yeah. I really do like the audience, and I get a better gauge for how jokes work.
Sure.
And I like running around. I like being in a comedy club. I like seeing people work. I like running a show. I love it's like I'm in New York City, and so I just run around at stand-up shows. That's sort of like what my week is, and I perform a bunch, and I go open mics when I feel like I have a new joke that I want to try. And so I don't know if that's one way of doing it. It's sort of post-pandemic. I'm sort of like shifting gears a little bit, where I think for the first couple of years I was doing it, I was just like, am I funny? Like, is there anything to this? And I think a lot of people were hitting stride as the pandemic hit. And now it's post-pandemic, and I feel like this is a new chapter in my comedy life where I know I'm funny. I know I have a lot of jokes. I know I can follow a really great comedian. I know I can go before a great comedian. I know I can host and bring up comedians I admire. Like, I've done all those things. So I feel confident in my material. And I'm just trying to find and build shows and community with people I admire, and hoping that at some point that leads to some sort of break. And I have confidence that it will, whether that's a writing job, whether that's writing a pilot with somebody, whatever it is, I'm very open to it. I try to be open to it. And that's one of the tough things about comedy right now, is that, or comedy in general always, I guess, is that there's no straight path. It's not like, I'm a junior analyst, and in 3 years I'll be a senior analyst. Like, that's not really how any of that goes. But as of right now, I am not adverse to that, because I'm open to what the world might have in store for me. And I'm having a lot of fun. I just live a fun life. It's not luxurious by any means, but I get by, and I'm doing fine. And I'm very artistically, I've just been so happy to spend some time alone and write, and then go out and do shows. That's really where I get my juice. And it's like a combination of being an introverted writer person and also an extroverted person who wants to run around and do and see comedy. So to answer your question, I don't know if I'm chasing a particular type of carrot or virality or whatever it is, but I know I'm getting funnier, and I know I'm getting more opportunities because of that. So I'm leaning into that as much as possible.
That's awesome. Yeah. And it seems like the world of comedy clubs, there aren't nearly as many as there were. And now post-pandemic, who knows how many people are going to be willing to jam into a tiny little basement and tables where your knees are touching with each other or not. Hopefully, for comedy's sake, that's the case. But in many ways, there are more limited ways to do what you do. But then again, with the media world, there's way more ways to do it. But then it becomes even harder to break through and find an audience, because you're competing with not only people who are truly funny and good comedians, but people who think they're funny and they're not, but are using the same tools you are. So it makes it harder to find that. So I guess it is just a matter of hammering away and continuing to try to just build the audience.
Yeah. It's something that I'm starting to think about more and more. But I would never say at any point I've sat down and been like, okay, my goal for the next 6 months is to just get as many Instagram followers as possible. I just I don't know if I have it in me, and I'm hoping to live a life that if I get really good at this, like, people will notice. and maybe that's naive. And there are times when I do have to play the game a little bit, but I try not to do that in a way that compromises the stuff I want to make or the people I want to do it with. Right. That's a tough thing in comedy too, because there's not a lot. There's some people that I don't want anything to do with for their alt-right politics or the way they treat women or whatever. And so, I try to do it and still have morals and still believe in the stuff that I'm doing. And again, like I love jokes. I love going to comedy clubs. But there's certain people I won't work with. There's certain things I won't do.
Interesting. And is this your full-time work? Are you working on the side, or this is your...
So right now I run a writing center in Queens at a gifted and talented high school, which is great because it's pretty good hours. And next year I'm not working Fridays, and it's just enough work to like keep me to like have stuff to do, but not enough work that it gets in the way. And so it's nice. I teach really smart kids how to write essays in a way that I don't have to grade what they write. I just sort of help. And they're not listening, so I'll say this, but I do a lot of my own stuff at work. I'll write new jokes. I'll listen to sets. I take an hour lunch and drink my coffee, and usually listen to my sets from the night before and take notes. So it's just enough structure right now to like not be in the way. And Selena, I don't know how to say her last name.
Kopic.
Yeah. I know her a little bit.
I was going to mention her. I was going to mention her because I had her as a guest, and she talked about she's kept a full-time job throughout her whole comedy career, and she mentioned how there are a lot of people who made it their full-time work. They basically came from rich families who could support them, and that, because it's hard, because you got to do it in New York. It's not, I had a full-time job living in New York, and I couldn't afford to live in New York.
Yeah, it's not cheap. We all have roommates and all that stuff, and I have friends. I have friends in their 30s, well into their 30s. Who are hilarious, who have been on TV multiple times, who are, who are, I have one friend who hasn't paid taxes in 10 years, who are like really, really like brilliantly funny. So like, I don't want to be that person either. I mean, I do in certain respects, but I don't, I'd like to pay my taxes every year. I'd like to have health insurance.
Sure.
That's helpful for me to know that if I, get hit by a bus, I won't bankrupt my family. That's comforting.
Right.
That's important to me too. But I have just enough work that I feel stimulated, and I feel like I'm helping people. At the end of the day, it's like, okay, I told some jokes. These ones worked. These ones didn't. And I helped a couple kids write essays today. That's not such a terrible life. I enjoy that life. It seems to be filled with purpose and meaning. And even now I'm off for the summer, and there are times when I'll regret saying this soon, but there are times when I'm like, damn, this is a lot of time. I need like I need just a tiny bit of structure. I don't know if that means getting up at 7 a.m. every day, but sometimes a little bit of structure does help those creative juices flowing. And you also, goodness, you write better jokes when you're living a life. You can't just
have material to pull from, have experiences to pull from. And,
you have to be constantly living and enjoying your life. And I'll pull jokes from conversations with friends. Oh, that is funny. Let me write that down. Let me make sure I carry my notebooks with me everywhere. So it's not just about having all this time to yourself and then going to do comedy. It really, you do benefit from living a life worth commenting on, is sort of the phrase people use.
No, that's a good one. I'm curious how you got into this line of work, but since it is a show about Hamilton, let's go back and start there. How'd you end up at Hamilton?
My dad was in law school when I was in high school, and so money was interesting because he was like slowly stopping work to finish school to start his second, third, fourth career, whatever it was. And so I originally wanted to go to Davidson College in North Carolina, and we just sort of couldn't afford, or it was like a foolish use of money to like fly down to North Carolina for a weekend. And so I sort of said, what's the school that's most similar to Davidson College in the North? I'm from Long Island originally. And I found Hamilton.
You're a Garden City guy, right? You're a Trojan?
Trojan. GC Trojans number 1. Are you a Long Island person, Dave?
I am a Long Island person, yes.
Oh, goodness. Which inferior town are you from?
Exactly why I had that reaction, Gabe. You Garden City people, you. I grew up in Merrick.
Okay. Yeah, I know it.
Oh yeah, we beat you in all in every sport.
Yeah.
Calhoun, yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, and even Calhoun from Merrick, not even Kennedy. Oh yeah, okay, yeah. Sure.
Well, I was in the marching band, so I wasn't kicking anyone's behind. But yeah, I drove up to Hamilton and I liked it and I knew it. You know, the Mengus family's from Garden City, so I know a bunch of them. And Andrew was my friend. He was 2 years older than me, so he was in sort of my 2 years older than me friend group. And he went there, so I had sort of always been on my radar. And from an early age, I knew I wanted to study music, but I knew also that I wanted a well-rounded education. That was something that was always sort of valuable to me. And while conservatories were tempting, I was a tenor. I was going to go to school to be a vocal performance major. I didn't know what else I wanted out of life, but I knew I wanted it to be, I knew I liked learning about different things. And Hamilton seemed to be the perfect mix of, hey, you can be a music major, you can do a thesis, you can sing in Welland, you can do all those things that you want to do, and you can take Gov, you can meet really smart kids, comp lit, all these things I ended up discovering. I wasn't ready for New York City yet. It didn't appeal to me. Now I can't live anywhere else, but at the time I wasn't quite ready. And so Hamilton sort of fit all the bills and I applied early decision and I got in and that was it. I was locked in.
And did you continue your music exploration while there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was a music major and I kept trying to add a second major. At first it was going to be Gov and then it was going to be English. And finally I decided on comp lit. I sort of became close with Peter Rabinowitz in that department. And it came down to the wire and I ended up just not taking the language requirements. So I didn't get the major, but I took it like 5 or 6 comp lit classes. So I think technically I have a minor in comp lit. And it was great. I loved it. I really did. I feel very lucky that I got to go to Hamilton. I advise the students that I see now to go to Hamilton. I've had 1 or 2 bite. So that's been fun. And yeah, I thought it was a great experience. It was a real privilege to be there. I think in retrospect, I see how fancy it was, that there was money for me to do things. I got a job volunteering at a local marching band, and Hamilton just said, "Here's a vehicle for you to use to go volunteer." And had I gone to another school, I don't want to name any other schools, had I gone to where my mother's a professor, had I gone to Hofstra, their reaction, I'm pretty sure, to, "Hey, I got a job volunteering down the road. Do you have a vehicle for me?" would have been, "No, what are you talking about?
Here's the number for a cab company."
Yeah, absolutely. And Hamilton sort of has that baked into it.
Yeah.
And that was really wonderful. And I appreciated it a lot in a way that my group of friends really, we tried to be a little bit of a counterculture in that we tried to acknowledge how much privilege we had going into it, and how insane in a good way Hamilton was. Like, oh, this is wild that they have all this food for us. This is wild that they have all these opportunities, all this money for fun. This is not a typical college experience. And in a lot of ways it's not. You know, Hamilton's an expensive, highly ranked place. And in terms of the colleges that exist in America, it's probably in the top 0.5%. Just in terms of the resources that they have for students.
And you recognize that when you were there and were able to appreciate it as such.
Yeah, in a way
that's pretty mature. I think that most people don't realize that until much later.
Yeah, I think it only enhanced as we got away from it. But my small sort of group of friends that we lived together in Babbitt, we saw ourselves as people who were trying to see through, who were trying to wade through all the BS, I guess, and get right to like, oh, this is an experience that we were getting that not everybody gets. We should try to really appreciate it.
And then so it was music going in. How does it end up being comedy on the coming out of it?
Like a lot of people, my comedy origin story is sort of funny.
I know it involves being out of the country.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, have you heard this somewhere? Have I spilled the
I, I
beans?
I do a little research, Gabe. I do a little research before I talk to people. But please tell a story.
No, of course. I got the George Watson's fellowship. So I taught in Scotland for a year. On Hamilton's dime, somebody's dime, because it's an exchange. So
Mhm.
a graduate of Hamilton College goes over to the George Watson School and teaches for a year, and a graduate of the George Watson School, high school, comes over to Hamilton and does a freshman year of college. That the visiting students' freshman year of college is not, oh, and they're going to continue
Mhm.
and do 4 years at Hamilton. It's more of like an exchange, in the sense that I wasn't gonna. No one from my job who goes to Scotland then stays at the college or stays at the high school and teaches forever. It's sort of just like a 1 year trade off.
Mhm.
And so I get over there, and it's a great school, and it's similar to Hamilton in that there's lots of money for stuff. I went on all these field trips to London and all over Scotland, and it was nice. But I was 22 years old. I was older than the students by 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, and I was younger than all the teachers by 9 years, 10 years, 11 years. And so I didn't really have anybody to hang out with. And when I was over there, my best friend and my girlfriend fell in love. And so in the story that I tell on stage, the next day I started to do stand-up comedy. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. It's sort of my origin story. And obviously, you can't fuel a career in comedy from one story like that. My desire and what I get out of comedy is certainly different now than it was then, but that's sort of how it started. Yeah, for sure.
I did see, and we don't have to go through all of your material and jokes, but I did see a video of you telling a little bit of that story, and it was very funny. The idea of I'm not afraid of comedy because
There's people I love that don't like my whole thing.
that's right.
Yeah. So audiences don't scare me at all.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
That's
that's
great.
sort of like an old one. It's so funny because I called the show The Whole Thing, and that joke ended up not even making the show. And so the show was based on a joke that got cut from the show, which is sort of just a little Easter egg for me.
Oh, that's really funny.
Yeah, and my goal before the pandemic, I was supposed to go on this tour where I was going to do all these fringe festivals. I was going to do a weekend in Pittsburgh, a week in Atlanta, 2 weeks in Winnipeg for the Winnipeg Fringe, and then a month in Edinburgh for the Fringe Festival. I was going to do that show and really hone it, and then get back from the Fringe and film it. And it was going to be my first special. And then the pandemic happened and life got delayed. And so now I don't really know what to do with this.
Oh, wow.
I haven't figured out what I'm going to do with the special yet, because I haven't filmed it and I haven't done it. But it's sort of like my first. Doing a comedy special in some ways is like your first novel or your first book of poems. And by the time it ends up being ready to be released, you're like, part of you is done with it because you lived it so long ago.
Sure.
But I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with that material. And I'm set to do all these fringe festivals next year when the world opens up again, hopefully. So I'll do that Pittsburgh weekend, that Atlanta week, that Winnipeg 2 weeks, and that Edinburgh month. And hopefully I'll probably end up doing the show and honing it. And it'll probably evolve in some ways from the first time I did it. The first time I put together that hour. Because the first time you put together that hour, the first time you put together that hour, it's really just an accomplishment to get that much time to write that many pages. And now with a little retrospect, I can go back and be like, oh no, the main point of this story is this. It's this other thing. Don't miss the forest for the trees. Focus on this part of the relationship. Focus on this part of, this is the funniest part of that joke. Follow that wormhole. And so now that's the privilege of being able to do this for years and years, is that you hone your craft a little bit. And so, yeah, I'll probably end up taking that special, which really is just one long story with a lot of tangents and jokes and all these different things, and filming it with a couple cameras and putting it out as a special, either on my website, on YouTube, whatever it is, as a means of my first big, here's what I've been working on.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah, it's cool. It's really cool. I mean, I'm very proud of it, and I kind of want to see what's the next big story I want to tell. I don't know if it's dawned on me yet, because the first one was so obvious, right? It's my comedy origin story. It's how I started. It's the story of my early 20s, and now I'm solidly in my late 20s, with a COVID year in there. I'm solidly in my late 20s, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's the next data point? What's the next hour show? Maybe the next one is just jokes. Maybe I'm just putting together my best hour of jokes for my second album. But part of me needs to get through the first one first.
How many COVID hours or COVID half hours are we going to get out of this when comedians all emerge? I think
people are like tired of it.
Yeah, right.
I know a couple. I know some comics that put out specials and things like that, but even so, there's only so much material you can write about your mask and like burping with your mask on. We get it. So I think people are looking forward to, goodness, anything else.
Right. You talking about your writing process, and as someone who works, it helps others write truly the written word. I'm curious, as you're putting material together as a writer, are there challenges of what seems good on paper as written word, when you actually vocalize it on stage, it doesn't play as well? And then you got to, what's the balance between writing something and then actually figuring out the timing, orally?
Yeah, stand-up is not a theoretical art. It is a literal thing. And so that's why it was so hard for me to write stand-up during the pandemic, because it doesn't exist in a vacuum. You can write ideas and you can have a general idea of where you want to go with something, but until you get up there and try it, you don't know. It's just an experiment that you haven't followed through with yet. It's just like the pre-planning. I wasn't a chemistry person, so maybe that's a poor analogy, but you have to go to the lab. You have to go to the gym. Otherwise, there's sort of no way of knowing. So I'll try to give an example. I'm working on a joke right now. It was based on a tweet that is based on my dad. So my dad, he grew up, when I was growing up, he worked in horse racing. And I had all these weird experiences because he always had a guy for everything, but he always had the horse racing version of a guy. Right. So when I took trumpet lessons as a kid, I took trumpet lessons from the bugler at the racetrack. And the first time I rode a horse, jockey that won the Kentucky Derby taught me how. And it was all fun and games until I broke my leg and the vet tried to put me down. So that's sort of like the direction of that. And I knew it worked on Twitter, and now it's working in person, but where to go from there, the next thing, that's something that every once in a while I'll say that joke on stage, and then I'll start to take it. I have at mics on certain shows, I'll just have the confidence in myself to see where that goes. What's the next thought I have? Do I have another line planned? And every once in a while, I'll stumble on something really fun, even a phrase that is funny. So he went on to become his job now is that he's a horse lawyer. So he's a lawyer for racetrack affairs. And so I've said that on stage before, not knowing where I was going to go with it. And then one day I on stage, I just said, "Oh, that sounds, you guys are laughing, but you clearly have never seen a horse divorce." And that's not anything, but those words next to each other really make me laugh. And so wherever I go next, whether that's hitting my notebooks, writing really hard, okay, I have horse divorce, I have horse lawyer. What's another example of a thing that this can go? You have to have faith that you'll find it either in your notebooks doing your homework or on stage in the moment somewhere else.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a back and forth. And you can sometimes tell when people do sway too much one way or the other. You have friends who write perfect jokes and they have no stage presence and they don't sell it and there's no act outs. And then you have some people who are all charisma, and you think, oh, this person could use a session with the old notebook to try to hammer out what these ideas are. And it's a balance. Mm-hmm. It's something I probably lean towards. At this point, I probably lean more towards the notebooks. I'm sort of a studious kind of guy. Mm-hmm. But I do want to leave myself open to excitement. Because I can't think of what the joke was, but the other day I said something on stage that like really worked, Oh, you know what I did? It was the bugler thing. I just tagged that with, um, it was fun to get trumpet lessons from the bugler, but it was tough because he only knew one song. And then I started to do the act out of, I turned the microphone into a fake trumpet and started playing the call to the post on stage. And I had no plans to do that. And it really worked. And I was like, oh, wow, this is so funny. That if you just sort of commit to something in front of people, maybe I wouldn't have pretended the microphone was a trumpet in my notebook, but on stage, your comedy brain takes over and you just try to do something silly. Mm-hmm. That works. That worked. At least it worked once. Who knows what'll happen next time.
You in the bits I've watched of yours and hearing you talk now, you clearly are someone who is thoughtful and mature, right? To be in college and recognize the privilege you have, that takes a real sophisticated maturity to it. Working in comedy, especially in comedy clubs, which aren't always the most mature environments, not always the nicest environments. You strike me as someone who's very thoughtful about the material to do that. You're not mean. How you able to navigate sort of that mean environment in that way?
I'm mean to certain groups of people.
Okay. Right.
I'm mean to the powerful. I'm mean to politicians. I'm mean to structures of power. Like like to the point where sometimes people don't like it when I make fun of certain people.
Well, I am trying to get David Solomon as a guest on the show, and I may have hurt my ability having you on.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think I call him the worst person on earth in my material, which, like, if you're listening to this and that offends you, I'm probably not the comedian for you. That's okay. Yeah. I mean, like, I voted for him, but like, I make fun of Joe Biden. I have no qualms about that. I think if Hamilton taught me anything, it's to question power and authority. And I have no loyalty to that guy whatsoever. So to answer your question, yes, I try to be thoughtful and I find my people, right? Like, I have this friend who's so funny. We were talking about comedy the other day, and he's so funny and so smart. And it turns out he went to Harvard. He just like doesn't tell people. I'm like, oh, you're a genius. Like, what are you doing? And he was like, sex has not been transgressive in this country in the last 40 years. Anybody can make a joke about sex. Nobody cares. What's transgressive is having an honest opinion that you believe in, like a conviction. People don't like when you have a conviction. And it really, it just like made me laugh because we think, oh, that's a dirty comic. That's a clean comic. He's like, no, dirty is like having views on the world. But yeah, I try not to be mean to like regular people for no reason, but I will call out, like, if you're the CEO of Goldman Sachs, like, that's antithetical to my worldview of what's, I don't want to get you in trouble. That's antithetical to my worldview of what's good, of what's a worthwhile life. I just don't believe it's good for the world, and I will make fun of you for it. And that's my little protest. And it's fun.
And it's a good joke. And
oh, thanks. Yeah, I don't just call them the worst person.
Because you also go after DJs as well, which is fun.
Yeah. It's really a joke about DJs fundamentally, who are the real problem. It's not capitalism's grasp on the working class and our failure to find solidarity. It's really bad music that I have a problem with.
And then working in that environment, inevitably you're getting hecklers where, in my experience as a patron of comedy clubs, is usually that's met with unkindness in return. How are you? Do you deal with that a lot?
It's funny. The traditional heckler, like, hey, you suck, doesn't really happen. I was away, but I have a weekly show, and there was like a drunk guy who was heckling, and like, apparently the show was the best it's ever gone. It was super fun. They were just talking to him. They'd stop in the middle of a joke. So if you know how to deal with it, it can be fun.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, you get somebody who's too cool for school, and it's not a big heckle. This is the heckle that actually offends me, which is, I do this joke. I can't say that. I can't say the joke because it's a bad word that you wouldn't want on here, but I'll tell you the premise is that, and it's true. The premise is I used to sing in a barbershop quartet, a competitive barbershop quartet. And I'm about to make fun of myself. I'm about to go into this whole thing about like how silly it is to be in a competitive barbershop quartet. And the other day, somebody gave me like a little snarky about my premise. So they were trying to make fun of me before I could even get into the joke about me. And that I took as way more offensive than somebody being drunk telling me that I'm terrible at life. Because that felt like, oh, we're in high school. This person's trying to bully me and like not make it seem like they're being a jerk. That offends me way more than somebody standing up. So it's, yeah, hecklers aren't met kindly by the audience, but there are ways to get under a performer's skin. I guess I'm giving everyone the playbook on how to do it. But yeah, it's not something I really worry about too much. If you're present, you can sort of get out of most situations. I mean, if a crazy person charges the stage, like that's different.
Yeah.
But if you're present and you're willing to talk to somebody, you can get out of a lot of situations. Now, I haven't worked all over the country yet, so I don't know what it's like to do a bad show at Friday late. They say is the worst show in comedy because everyone's been working all day. And now it's 11 o'clock at night and they've been drunk since 6. Yeah. So anything could happen. Yeah. I haven't had a ton of tough Friday late shows, but maybe in 5 years when I've worked the road a little bit more, I'll have better stories for you.
All right. Well, I'll come back to you for that. Who are some of your comedy inspiration? Who are people that you would admire?
Yeah, that's a great question. Originally it was Mike Birbiglia. Mm-hmm. He's my first, and he does the long solo shows, story type shows. And I love them, and I've seen them all. And really, My Girlfriend's Boyfriend, if you listen to that, that's my favorite one. And that came out, I was probably a sophomore or junior in college, and I watched it with my girlfriend at the time. And I remember being like, oh, I want to do that. Like, that's really something. So he's the first one. Nowadays, one of them I just had on my podcast is this guy named Ted Alexandro, mm-hmm. who, speaking of people who speak truth to power, like he's the best. He's the king of that. And he comes from a place of, he's one of the most respected comedians in New York. He tried to organize several times. He tried to unionize comedians for pay raises at comedy clubs. He's a true leftist, which is how I identify politically as well. So he's somebody I admire, not just for his, what I would argue, perfect jokes, but also for his politics. And there's some people who I just think are brilliant joke writers. Eddie Pepitone, Jim Gaffigan, Sarah Silverman I love. There's so many funny women. Mm-hmm. My goodness. Maria Bamford is delightful and weird and funny.
Yeah.
Hassan Minhaj is another guy who does solo shows. So those are all people that really speak to me.
Gotcha. And are you, again, being as thoughtful as you are, and it seems like the type of material you do, this is less, I think, of an issue, but there is at least a school within comedy that rails against the cancel culture. I thought it was an interesting conversation. I did listen to the Ted Alessandro conversation, which is a different take on it, right? He railed against Louis C.K. going back to the Comedy Cellar, and actually did it on the Cellar stage, which was really powerful. Mm-hmm. But curious to get your take on sort of the environment now and what it means for comedians.
Yeah, I'm not somebody that is gonna say cancel culture is ruining everything. I think I didn't think you would. Substitute for cancel culture would be consequences. Though I have heard arguments before that some people who really haven't done anything wrong, who's just mere association with somebody, gets them less work and costs them money and dollars. And I do have sympathy for those people. But I don't think writ large, like the way that we talk about cancel culture, I don't think we're talking about small independent artists who work with somebody problematic who's making $30,000 a year. I don't think we're talking about those people. I think we're talking about the Louis C.K.'s of the world, other people who have transgressed. But no, I don't think it's necessarily ruining comedy. I think you can still get away with a lot. I think you can still say a lot. I think you can joke about anything, but it's got to be a joke. It can't just be the most vulgar thing you can think of. I think there's certain pockets of comedy that cater to a certain right-wing ideology that I don't believe in.
Yeah.
And I also think that I have no problem performing for liberals or Trump supporters or whomever, in that when I'm on stage, I try to be fun. Like, it's about having fun. It's a comedy show, right? But I think within that, there's room to make fun of lots of different types of people. But no, I wouldn't say I'm like worried about cancel culture. I think it's a cancer to society. I just don't believe in it. I just think people should be held accountable for the most part.
Gotcha. Let's go back to the podcast. One of the things that really piqued my interest is that there are many similarities between our experiences in doing our respective podcasts, because it is, reconnecting with an experience in many ways. And I heard you speak at the alumni event that you did, where you talked about the podcast, about, people generally enjoy reconnecting with their classmates, and you're doing that. So I'm curious, as you've gone through it, what have you learned about your high school experience that was different than you remember, or have you had a different view of that experience now going through it?
That's a very nice question. What have I learned? One of the things I learned is that the people I had good feelings about when I was 6, I was right about, for the most part. That a lot of these folks, and again, I'm not talking like my enemies, but a lot of the things I'm learning about from these people from catching up is that I was right to like them when I was a kid, and that they've lived really fascinating lives that I'm glad I get a chance to sit down with them now and talk about. Vast majority of my guests I haven't spoken to in 10 plus years. And in the same way that they think it's interesting that I've been hanging out at comedy clubs and writing and got my heart broken abroad and all these things, they've been similarly living. And I do have a tendency to talk to artists, right? To talk to people who did music, who did travel, who did explore what this big world has to offer. And so maybe it's a bias in the selectivity of who I'm choosing to speak with, but it does warm my heart that these people that I liked then are still so fascinating and interesting now. And there's a lot of great episodes of my podcast where I do say so myself. If you're a Hamilton adjacent person, the Emily Menges episode, I think you'll really enjoy. She's a pro soccer player, and her whole family went to Hamilton, except for her, who went to Georgetown to play soccer. So if I had to plug one, that would be one. You also asked how I see myself differently. I don't know if I see myself much differently, because I do try to keep the podcast about the guest for the most part. I guess the things I've learned about myself have been pretty internal, in terms of, oh, you were right to ask Emily, even though you haven't spoken in 12 years. You were right to ask Chris Regan, even though you haven't seen him in 10 years, because they gave off good vibes. And a lot of the podcast is me trusting that I can pick up good vibes on people, even when I was 15.
Yeah. One of the reasons I ask is because again, going through this, I've talked to friends and classmates on this, and have talked to a lot of people that I didn't know prior to this about their Hamilton experience. And while I'm genuinely interested and focus on the people's time at Hamilton and what they've done since, for a host of just very interesting paths that people have taken, yours very much included.
Yeah.
Some of the most eye-opening ones for me have been the people that I knew at Hamilton, or thought I knew, and how it made me look at my experience differently. And that, one, some of the insecurities I had, other people had as well. We just didn't talk about it or know about it. And it's curious. So as I think about this experience, if I were to do this for high school, I think it would be, it'd be even more sort of enlightening of, we were all going through these weird things that we never talked about,
I've had some moments like that where this girl that we all had a crush on, who we all thought was great, she came on later and was like, yeah, I was really insecure about like I wasn't a great reader when I was a kid. I was like, you weren't a great reader. Like, you were the coolest kid in school. Who cares if you can read? So that was sort of fun to see. It wasn't so much learning about myself, but learning that other people, had anxiety in third grade. I guess we all did. And that's sort of comforting too. I think you're right to identify that.
Do you have a lot more people left in the class? Do you see this thing growing or expanding in scope?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what my next couple steps are. Part of me wants to just keep talking to classmates and talk to as many from my graduating class as possible. Some guests haven't been in from my graduating class, but I just wanted to talk to them. And then I had Ted Alexandro, who's like in a lot of ways like the godfather of New York comedy. And so I'm trying to figure out, do I just stick with classmates and make that my weekly episodes? And then do I start like a premium tier for people who want to hear me talk to comics? Because I've gotten some feedback from that. Just like small ways to monetize, nothing crazy. I don't have any delusions that a podcast where I talk to my high school classmates could ever be the Bill Simmons podcast. But I do think it could. I could be the absolute best Garden City High School podcast there is.
And if it pays for your hosting fees and a new
exactly.
mic or something like that, there's something to that. Sure.
Yeah. I don't hate that. And again, I have this day job where I don't have to compromise. I make just enough money that I can sometimes travel and I can host a podcast and I don't have to worry. And it lets me do the artistic career that I want to live because I have health insurance. And I think that too, and you didn't ask for this, but it does too speak to my leftism that like the urgency with which we need Medicare for all, in that if we had Medicare for all, I could quit my job and piece together income in other ways and not worry that I would be drowned in medical debt for getting sick. Right now, that's not a right in this country, and it is in every other developed country. And for me, that's like the biggest leftist thing that we can get that will just improve well-being and happiness and the world. And it influences my comedy and it influences my literal life. When I turned 27 and I said, or when I turned 26, I said, one more year in my parents' health insurance, my stupid brain said, oh, thanks, President Obama. I got an extra year of health insurance. When I should have been saying, why do I not get this for the rest of my life? This is insane. Why are profits being put ahead of this? There
was a great little bit on I just was watching an episode of John Oliver last night. I'm behind on episodes, and he was doing a bit about healthcare, and he said, there's different systems of healthcare, and ours is, and then a big comes up, wrong. We do it the wrong way.
Yes, absolutely.
Exactly what you're saying. Yeah.
And a lot of people would tell you it's wrong for a host of different reasons, right? But I'm really passionate about Medicare for all. I think it's really, really, really important. And I found a way to maneuver within capitalism to still have an artistic goal and to still live a meaningful, fulfilling life. But not everybody gets that opportunity. And I wish they did. And so that sort of circles back, I guess, on my comedy leftism.
So for students listening who are interested in doing what you do, what advice would you have to navigate that system?
Probably go to law school. No, come to New York City, start doing some open mics, find your people. It's as easy as that. It's really that simple. If you have rich parents, that's even better. That could help. Mine don't pay my rent, but they are supportive emotionally, which I guess is fine. But yeah, just come to New York City and come to some open mics. And maybe you're like a Bushwick hipster person and you want to hang out there. Maybe you're like a club comic who wants to hang out at Caroline's or the Cellar or lots of places that I've, have friends who work there and hang out there. And it just starts by getting out the door and seeing if you like comedy clubs. It's possible that you don't. Maybe you want to make sketches in your room with your friends. It's probably more lucrative. But what I like is in person. And so that's, God, as I say this, as I do this podcast, I'm like, I just sound like someone who will never make it. But I'm like way too.
I don't think that is not it.
No, I'm kidding. I'm gonna be so rich, Dave. You're gonna be calling me to ask for money.
There you go.
And the best thing you can do is, if you're a Hamilton student, is to get Hamilton to pay me to come up and do stand up. That's probably the smartest thing you could do for your career.
That we're gonna make that happen. I like that idea. Let's make that happen. So as you think back on your Hamilton experience, coming up from Garden City,
yeah.
Ugh. Anything you wish you had known, looking back on your time?
That's a great question. Anything I'd wish I had known? I wish I had been more certain. I had a hunch, but I wish I had been more certain in my gut feeling that I would have multiple iterations of myself, and that Hamilton is a great preparation, I think, to get exposed to all the different types of person, or to the different types of person that you could be. So whether that's music guy, Hamilton prepared me to be a music teacher if I chose to go down that path. As a writer, comedian, it certainly, taught me how to structure an argument and how to crack an idea. As a comedian, it taught me how to stay up late and bullshit, which is like most of the job. And so I think if I had known going in, hey, you're going to live a long life, knock on wood, and there's going to be a lot of different versions of you, lean in, don't lean just into one or two, but lean into all of them, and then you'll be more prepared for who you could be in the future.
All right, that's Gabe Mollica, class of 2014. And for the record, I do not share his opinion on Hamilton's new chairman of the Board of Trustees. I'm not sure if I share his opinion on DJs. Jury's still out on that one for me. Be sure to check out Gabe's podcast, 35 Minutes with Gabe Mollica. Get it wherever you get podcasts, or you can check him out on social media at Gabe Mollica. My thanks to Gabe for joining this week. You have been listening to Had I Known on WHCL-FM, Clinton, New York. HadIKnown.buzzsprout.com. Had I Known Show on social media. As always, my thanks to Dr. Michael Woods for supplying the music on the show. And once again, Doc is going to play us out. Hope you enjoyed the show. Talk to you next week.
Had I known podcast show on your radio or take it to go.